Hey, I'm Susan Palmer, and this is my weekly studio update. Thanks so much for tuning in. I had a really great week. I taught my free guitar class last Saturday. I limited it to 4 students, and just so I could give some more personal attention. And it was so much fun. It was, in fact, so much fun that I've decided to do a free class each month this year. And also, I'm restarting my beginning, intermediate, and advanced 4-week group sessions. So if you want information on that, join my mailing list. I'll have the little link below for you to do that. For this week's session, I've got, the usual technique, reading, chords, scales, theory, a pro tip, and a tune. That's kind of my usual thing I'm doing these days up here. And I try to cover things that came up in my studio with my students this week, in part because I feel like some of those students could use a refresher on what we covered in our class. And also, maybe you're interested in guitar lessons and you just want to get a feel for my teaching style. So see what a music teacher nerd I am, and that's fine with me. So it's not going to hurt my feelings if you scroll down and use the chapters just to link to the section that you're most interested in, or if you want to watch the whole thing, here's what we're going to cover. For the technique, I demonstrate a triad study I use with major scales with a lead-in tone. I go through the 5 positions in the key of C major. For the reading, I talk about the system for counting. For chords, I go over a really cool 2-5 move. For scales, I think this is the highlight of the session. I play a simple jazz blues solo, and then I break it down so you can kind of play along and learn what's going on in that with me. And let's see, for the theory, I talk about a melodic and harmonic device that works over 2-5-1s. For the tune, I covered Satin. That was a tune that a couple of my students are working on this week, so having that melody there will hopefully be helpful. And I have a pro tip at the end that deals with practicing, how to sit down and practice every day. Like, what's the strategy? What's the secret there? So I hope you enjoyed this week's session here. Be sure to subscribe to the channel, to the newsletter. Check out all of the materials here. Find me on Instagram. I am the guitar player on there. That's my handle. And all those links and everything are down below. You guys know the drill by now. So thanks so much, and I hope you enjoy. This week I got an email from another guitar teacher who uses the Guitar Lesson Companion Volume 1 with his students. And one reason he gave me for wanting to use this series over other series with his students was that it really focuses a lot on rhythm. And I really worked hard to create enough rhythm studies so that students had to develop a very good understanding of rhythm. I wanted students not just to be able to play the exercises, but to develop a really clear system for counting so that they could count through and play through any music that came their way. And they would eventually develop the capabilities of notating any music that they heard in their heads. So I just want to be real clear about when you're learning how to read, it's not about the music on the page for any method book that you're using. It's really about developing a system that you can transfer to whatever it is that you come across. This is a handy chord move you can use when you're going from a 2 chord to a 5 chord. Here's D minor 7 to G7, which totally works. But you could also do D minor 7 to G9, another dominant chord here, just an extension of that G7 chord. And really all that's changing between these two chord shapes is one note, but I have to move 2 fingers in order to accommodate that change. So what's happening, I've got a D minor 7 here, and it's that C on the G string that wants to half step down to become B, so that this can turn into a G9 chord. So it's just that one note that changes, but the whole chord changes. And it's a really handy move when you're using, when you're playing chord melodies or just grooving on things. And this is an idea you can take through the different inversions. That's something that I do with my students. But for right now, I think, just practicing this. Here's G minor 7 to C9, E minor 7 to A7 or A9. So now let's break that solo down. This is a 12-bar jazz blues in the key of B flat. It coincides with audio track 109 from the Guitar Lesson Companion Volume 1. And I'm using a combination of major pentatonic scales, minor pentatonic scales, and chord tones. The one thing that's staying the same throughout this, or that I'm really trying to create as our foundation, is the rhythm. So the riff starts off B flat, G, F, B flat, G, F, B flat, C, D flat. And sorry for my halfway singing on that. So B flat is my root of the B flat 7 chord. G is the 6th, which is a really fun note to play. F is my 5th. And then when I get to that E flat 7 chord in the second measure, I'm sliding in from C to D flat. And that D flat, that is the dominant 7. That is the flat 7 of that E flat 7 chord being played. So that's a real strong note to hit. Then that idea repeats. Slight variation. This time I'm hitting another G and then another F. Then I go back to the original riff, because we have that E flat 7 chord, so I really want to highlight that D flat right there. And then I start the riff the same, and then I'm going to highlight D, C, D, C, B, because I'm thinking of that half step that occurs when you go from a D7 chord to a G7 chord. So I have D, C, B, and then I think maybe I hit a G as well. That's the root of that G7 chord. When I get to the C minor 7, I'm going to use the same rhythmic motif that I used previously, but I'm going to also incorporate some chord tones like I did for the D minor 7 to G7. So I have C, B flat, G, C, B flat, G, A, C, F. Now the C is obviously the root of C minor 7, B flat is our flat 7, G is the 5th, and then when I change to that F7 chord, I'm playing A, which is the 3rd of F, C, which is the 5th of F, and F, which is the root of F. And in the last 2 bars, I'm going to highlight those chord tones again. So I have D, C, B. That is D is over the D minor, that's the root. C is the flat 7 of D minor 7. B is the 3rd of the G7, and then the root G. and then I play C, which is the root of C minor 7, the next chord, B flat, which is my flat 7. I'm going to half step into that note A from A flat to A, and then C, and then F. So I've got and that takes me to the end of the solo. For this week's theory, I want to talk about a harmonic and melodic concept that I actually use a few times in this week's lesson. I'm going to use a 2-5 chord progression in the key of C. So we have D minor 7 going to G7. And I want to show you what happens when we change from one chord to the next. And this is something that shows up in the solo section of this week's lesson, as well as in the chord section. And the way that we spell a D minor 7 chord is D, F, A, and C. The way we spell a G7 chord is G, B, D, and F. And if we look at these on paper, you can see I drew a little line from that C, which is the flat 7 of the D minor 7 chord, to the third, which is the note B of that G7 chord. And the reason I drew that line is because those two notes are a half step apart. And the thirds and the sevens are really important notes in chords. They tell us whether a chord is major or minor or dominant. They're really helpful notes to play because they're outlining the chord progression, and they really cut through to the heart of the matter when you're soloing. So you really want to pay attention to the flat 7 of the 2 chord and how that half steps down to the 3 of the 5 chord. And so in our different illustrations of this throughout this lesson, you'll hear a line similar to that. And I also played those chords, D minor 7, moving that one note C to B to create that G9 chord. So it's a really fun and useful melodic and harmonic device that will really enhance your solos and really make them cut to the chase. My pro tip for you this week has to do with practice, and specifically, how do you sit down and practice? There are so many distractions, and it's just hard, even if you have the time, to motivate yourself to get in the chair and get the work done. Once you're sitting down and practicing, usually you're enjoying yourself and it's no big deal, but it's just the getting started part that's really hard. What I do is I tie my practice to something else that I enjoy. So I really love coffee. So my morning routine involves getting a cup of coffee and sitting down in my practice seat to get my work done. And, that is a great way for me to get started with my day. I'm really enjoying myself. I always look forward to it, and it just helps me get started. So I encourage you to find something that you enjoy and try to tie that to your guitar. Maybe that's watching part of a TV program while you do your warm-ups, and then you close your computer and you start practicing. Maybe that's a hot beverage like I enjoy. But regardless, that is a way that you can use to help you get started with your practicing. So after I get started with practicing, I usually want to go for a long time, and it's that coffee that kind of gets me in the seat. So hopefully that will work for you too.